everybody. This video is your introduction to the piece of equipment that you will miss the most at the end of the semester. This is our mighty board shear, and it's a wonderful piece of equipment that I want you to understand how it works, and especially for you to understand that it deserves your care and respect. This has been here at BYU for many years. When it was purchased, it was a $6,000 purchase, and is worth that or more nowadays. It's helped a lot of students make beautiful books. So I'm going to show you the different parts of the board shear and then how you will use it when you're cutting your paper and your board. And those are the only two things that you use this board shear to cut. No wood, no metal, anything like that, because we want to keep the blade nice and sharp. And we actually have a fellow from Massachusetts that flies out every couple of years and sharpens the blades on the board shear. So we like to protect it so that it stays sharp for you and for the students that follow you in this class. So the board shear is just that. Shears are cutting instruments, and this is meant to cut board or paper. It gets its name because it's actually a giant pair of scissors. So I'm going to have Claire come around so you can see it from this other side. There are two blades on the board shear, just like a pair of scissors has. This upper blade is designed to, this is what is movable, and it's built with a counterweight at the back of it so that when it's up, it stays up and it won't fall down and chop off a finger. The lower blade is actually here on the edge of the table, and it is equally as sharp as this top blade. So don't forget that this edge to the table is a blade, it's sharp, and don't slide your fingers along it when you're getting your paper into position. So it operates just up and down like a pair of scissors. The blade is connected to this table, and on the table is attached a what's called the rule, and the rule is this silver bar right here that is exactly perpendicular to the blade, to the blade end of the table. So when you put something along this rule and cut, you're going to get a square cut, and that's what you want. When you are cutting, you're going to secure your paper or board in place with this clamp, and it's operated by a foot pedal, and so you'll clamp down before you cut anything so that the material doesn't shift when the blade comes in contact with it. So that clamp plays an important part in a successful cut. When you're using the foot clamp, be sure that you keep your foot on it when you release the clamp, and don't just let it pop back up, because that's not good for the machine. On the table attached to the rule is called the table gauge, and it's sometimes called the back gauge. But this gauge slides across the rule and allows you to set it to specific measurements so that you can get an exact cut, the size that you want. And so it slides along here. When you get it set to whatever measurement you want, let's say I'm going to set it for 8 inches, I put my ruler up against the rule with the 8-inch mark right on the edge of the lower blade, and Claire can show you how that's right there, and then I clamp it to hold it. And then I slide the gauge over until it just barely touches the end of the ruler, and then I tighten the knob. But when I say tighten, all I mean is I just turn it until it engages. I don't need to crank it, because that actually will throw the gauge off, and the gauge is designed to also be a 90-degree perpendicular corner to the rule, and is parallel with the edge of the blade. So just a really soft tightening of that knob. There's another gauge on the board shear. It's right here by the scrap catcher, scrap table or surface. So when you're just cutting things, the scraps or what you're cutting falls onto this platform. But connected to the platform is this spring gauge, or it's called a front gauge, and it's used if you want to make very small cuts. So I can use this handle and turn that front gauge so that I could make a cut as small as 1/2 inch or something. You won't use this very often, but it comes in handy. And when you get it set to the measurement you want, say I wanted a 3-inch cut, I would again use my ruler, put the 3-inch line on the edge of the shear, clamp it down, and then close this front gauge until, again, it just barely touches the end of the ruler. And then there's a smaller knob that locks it into place so it will stay. So you could cut 100 pieces of board or paper, and they would all be 3 inches wide. So that's a really nice feature of this board shear. Not all board shears have that front gauge. Ordinarily, we keep the gauge or the scrap tray out so that it's plenty big to catch your paper. It can, you can see that I'm pulling it. I can turn the knob and have it go out so far that it actually falls off of its track. And if that happens and you go to then try to bring it back in, it won't work because it's off of the track. So all you have to do is kind of lift this and turn the wheel, and it engages the tray back onto the track, and then it's fine. So let me just show you quickly how you will use the board shear. Now, when we talked about tools that you need, I talked about getting a ruler where the numbering starts exactly flush with the end of the ruler. That's so that you can use your ruler to bring the back gauge, the table gauge, to the exact measurement you want. If the numbering is offset, which most rulers are, then the gauge is not going to be to the exact measurement that you want. So there will always be a ruler with the numbering starting on the very end on the board shear, and you don't need to worry about having one, although they're really nice to have. So let's say I want to make a 6-inch cut on my board for my Coptic book covers. I've placed my ruler at the 6-inch with the 6-inch mark on the edge of the board shear. I'm going to slide the table gauge over just so it touches the end of the ruler, and then I'm going to take my piece of board, which is squared, and we'll talk about that on Wednesday, but you're always going to want to work with a squared piece of board or paper. I'm going to put it in the board shear so that the corner of the board is up against this corner, this right angle of the table gauge and the rule. I've got the board in there. I'm going to clamp down so that I know that it's held in place. And when I'm cutting board, I also use my hand just to keep the blade from pulling the board out of its, out of the square area. And then when you're cutting board, you're going to want to chop instead of just pushing down, because again, pushing is going to tend to pull the board out of that alignment that you want. So instead of pushing down, I'm going to just chop it like that. And so there I've got a piece that I know is cut square and is 6 inches. If I wanted, if I needed to do several 6-inch cuts, I would leave the gauge set at that mark and make all those 6-inch cuts, and then change the gauge when I was ready to make the perpendicular cuts. If you're cutting paper on the board shear, you can cut 3 or 4 pieces of paper at a time, and it handles that just fine. I wouldn't try to cut any, like 10 pieces of paper or something. It will chew it up, but you can easily cut 4 pieces because it cuts through boards, so that's probably, that makes sense to you. Watch your fingers. This could do serious damage. We haven't had anybody lose a finger. One thing we have had people do, including yours truly, is when you clamp down, make sure your fingers are away from the clamp, because it hurts really bad if that clamp grabs your finger. Also, when you're done using the board shear, please put the blade down, put the handle down, just for safety's sake. So you'll become very comfortable with using this. It's a wonderful tool, and like I said, it's the tool in the lab that you'll miss the most when you leave bookbinding. So we're glad that we've got it, and if you have any questions, of course I'll be here and guide you the first time you use it, but I wanted you to have that information ahead of time. So there you go, the board shear.